Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Hope everything is fantastic and you have a great week. Got the Kindle with me today because we've got a book review. Haven't done one of these in a while. I have not been reading as much lately as I have been in the past month because I've been writing. I've been writing my own book. But this weekend I decided to read something a little bit different for my own personal enjoyment and as a bit of a study. And the book that I chose was Stephen King's The Wind Through the Keyhole. This is book 4.5, I guess, in the Dark Tower. Chronologically, it was written after the series, so, book 8. But it's interjected between a couple of other books. And I picked this book because it was Stephen King. Because for as much as I've given him trouble, or I've talked on this channel about not enjoying his writing style, that changed significantly in the past month when I read The Stand, and I did a video about it, and I talked about how I really started to come into an understanding of how Stephen King writes based on The Stand. And in fact, I'm reading another Stephen King novel right now, which we'll review probably at some other point this week. So I really wanted to read something else of his, but I didn't want to commit to one of his bigger works. So I picked The Wind Through the Keyhole because I have read The Dark Tower, but I had not read this book. And I really wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit more. The main character of my book is this. It shares a lot. There's a whole lot of parallels. Let's put it that way. So to my character and Roland, and so I wanted to kind of revisit Roland, but also revisit Stephen King. I think that as I'm learning to write, I'm also starting to be a little bit. The way that I read has changed a little bit, so I wanted to give it a shot. Here's my thoughts. It's going to be very difficult for me to do this review without spoilers, but I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything because it's a very, very slim book. And I read it in like maybe 5-6 hours. I don't know. I finished it in 2 days. So, The Wind Through the Keyhole is two stories within a story. What I mean by that is, we briefly get to visit our friends Roland and Susan and Eddie and Jake and Oi, the quartet. We get to briefly visit them as they are on their continuing journey after book 4. And they have to cross a small river, and they meet a man, and blah, blah. There's a storm coming, right? That's pretty much it for those characters. There's a storm coming, and it's this really terrible storm, and they have to escape. The book is really an excuse to tell another story of Roland's life. And I really enjoyed the story with Roland, Roland's backstory book. I don't remember what the name of the book was. Wizard and Glass, I think, where he goes to, and gets one of Merlin's glasses, globes, whatever the hell it is. I actually really enjoyed that story because I really wanted to hear more about Midworld, more about this weird place and what it was. So knowing that this book is basically Roland telling you another one of his stories, I was all about it. What it really is Roland telling you one of his stories as an excuse to tell you another story. And that other story is a fairy tale. A fairy tale set in, it's a mid-world fairy tale. It's a tale that they tell their children. And it's about a boy named Tim, I think it was Tim, whose dad dad dies and he's a lumberjack and the kid has to figure this whole thing out and he ends up meeting Merlin and whatever. The real reason I chose the book was because King has a very different narrative style. King's books don't necessarily follow a normal structure. They're not immediately apparent that they're these 3-act sort of things. In this book, you could argue that there's 3 acts. You could argue that in Act 1, the main characters are on their quest to the Dark Tower, and at the end of Act 1, they are told that there's a storm coming. In Act 2, they have to quickly gather firewood and build protection because the storm is vicious and will destroy them. temperatures drop negative 100 degrees within an hour, and trees snap and all this stuff. And then Act 3 is they survive the storm and they come out the other side. Sure. That is the basic 3-act structure. But that's not the book. That's not what this book is about. That's what happens in the chronology of Roland's trek to the tower. That's what happens. They go across the river. Oy is acting funny. The old man on the river tells them there's a Stark blast coming. This Stark blast is basically like a hurricane / really big tornado that also is super cold and, kills everything in its path. And they have to find shelter. The old man tells them there's a, church or a building up, city hall or whatever that's stone. And they go there and they gather wood and they build a fire. And then Roland tells them a story while they're waiting out the storm. He tells them this big story about his life, an early gunslinger story where he goes to another town to find a skin changer. And during that story, he tells another character a story, which is this story about the boy meeting Merlin. And then the storm's over, and then they leave. So yeah, there's 3 acts there, sure. In the middle of that, there's also 3 other acts running concurrently within his main story, the Roland story that he's telling, which also has another 3-act story. The point is, Stephen King's books don't always follow normal narrative structure. I said it when I when I reviewed The Stand. I don't know what that book was about, and I loved it. I can't sit here and tell you what the 3 acts of that book were. I can't tell you who the main character of that book was. I can't tell you if there was a main character. I can tell you that there's a lot of characters who went through a whole lot of changes and stuff happened around to the world around them, but I think the world is the main character of The Stand, and the world is the only character that went through a 3-act structure. That's fine, right? And that's what makes him stand out. That's what makes him different. This is no different. And if you enjoyed The Dark Tower, I think you'll enjoy this book. It's very much not really a part of the Dark Tower story. It's more just Roland's backstory plus this little fairy tale thrown in. And when I say little, that little fairy tale is like half of the book, right? When I started reading the fairy tale, the book told me I had like 3 hours to go for that section. So it's like half the book. But it was really good. And I also think that you could read this book without really knowing anything about the Dark Tower, which is, you definitely could not do that with the other 7. The other 7 are confusing even when you know what's going on, and that's part of the fun of it. This one is not really that confusing. It's more about a story about a cowboy going into town and saving them from a mutant. The language and the oddities of Midworld would be confusing, but they're not any more confusing than the first time you read them. Stephen King, the one thing that I really want to learn from him and from books like this is that he does not take any time to tell you what's going on. He really doesn't. He gives you the barest bones. He has this amazing ability to set a scene, and it's almost like he's watching a movie and just typing out what he sees. And so as a reader of his work, you can really feel and see and smell and hear a setting that Stephen puts you in. He does not give you any explanation of how any of it works. Like at any point. Maybe he does in some books. Maybe he does in some of the more supernatural or horror-based books. But in the Dark Tower series, he really doesn't explain anything to you. There's technology that seems to be, almost mythically magical, but it's technology. There's phrases and places and characters and world-building elements that he just mentions and then moves on. And if you feel like trying to figure out what it means, good on you. Because he's not going to give you a sentence explaining himself. And I think that's really valuable as a reader. I think that I have taken and as a writer, because I have taken my story, the story of this character that I have in the story who is on a quest. And I have set it in a version of Earth because I didn't want to have to explain everything. I have a magic. This user has magical abilities, and I'm explaining that. And I didn't want to mix the explanation of that thing, because it's a very big thing. I didn't want to mix that with an explanation of a whole world. So I just stuck it, in a version of Earth and let you, the reader, assume everything that I'm telling you about the place, because it's what you see in your head. I don't have to give you details. And I need to learn that. And I think this book is probably, truthfully, one of the more narratively concise books of Stephen King's I've ever read. Even though it's 3 stories in one, a story within a story within a story, it's very narratively concise. And all of those stories play really well and make sense. So, went through the Keyhole, book 4.5 of The Dark Tower. I think it was like a solid 7. It's a good book. It's fine. Like, it was a good read. Obviously, I read it in 2 days. I read it in basically 3 sittings of about, it's about 6 hours for me to read. So I don't know how many pages it was, but I enjoyed it. Yeah, I think that's it. I haven't started writing it today. I mean, I've written 300 words, but I'm gonna write tonight. So I'll update you tomorrow on my NaNoWriMo progress. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is denigrate. It is an adjective meaning insulting, put down, demean, or belittle. Everything we shut our eyes to, everything we run away from, everything we deny, denigrate, or despise serves to defeat us in the end. Henry Miller, an American author and painter. Denigrate. D-E-N-I-G-R-A-T-E. I'm not positive that was the word of the day today. I need a better bookmark so that I can keep track of where I'm at.